John Singer Sargent. John Singer Sargent's father, Fitzwilliam Sargent, was an eye surgeon in Philadelphia. After John's older sister died at the age of 2, his mother, Mary Newbold Singer, suffered a breakdown, and the couple decided to go abroad to recover. Although based in Paris, Sargent's parents moved regularly with the seasons to the sea and the mountain resorts of France, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. While Mary was pregnant, they stopped in Florence, Italy because of a cholera epidemic. Sargent was born there in 1856. Early on, his mother gave him sketchbooks and encouraged drawing excursions. Sargent worked on his drawings, and he enthusiastically copied images from the Illustrated London News of ships and made detailed sketches of landscapes. He studied for a year at the Academy of Florence, but then returned to Paris, from where he began his art studies with the young French portraitist Carolus Duran from 1874 to 1878. In 1874, Sargent passed on his first attempt the rigorous exam required to gain admission to l'École des Beaux-Arts, the premier art school in France. Sargent's early enthusiasm was for landscapes, not portraiture, as evidenced by his voluminous sketches full of mountains, seascapes, and buildings. His teacher, Carolus Duran's expertise in portraiture finally influenced Sargent in that direction. Commissions for history paintings were still considered more prestigious, but were much harder to get. Portrait painting, on the other hand, was the best way of promoting an art career, getting exhibited in the salon, and getting commissions to earn a livelihood. Sargent's first major portrait was of his friend Fanny Watts in 1877, and was also his first salon admission. Its particularly well-executed pose drew attention. His second salon entry was The Oyster Gatherers of Consal, an impressionistic painting which received warm reviews. In 1879, at the age of 23, Sargent painted a portrait of teacher Carolus Duran. The virtuoso effort met with public approval and announced the direction his mature work would take. Its showing at the Paris Salon was both a tribute to his teacher and an advertisement for portrait commissions. After leaving Carolus Duran's atelier, Sargent visited Spain. There he studied the paintings of Velázquez with a passion, absorbing the master's technique, and his travels gathered ideas for future works. He was entranced with Spanish music and dance. The trip also reawakened his own talent for music, which was nearly equal to his artistic talent, and which found visual expression in his early masterpiece, Al Jaleo, in 1882. Upon his return to Paris, Sargent quickly received several portrait commissions. His career was launched. He immediately demonstrated the concentration and stamina that enabled him to paint with workmanlike steadiness for the next 25 years. He filled in the gaps between commissions with many non-commissioned portraits of his friends and colleagues. His fine manners, perfect French, and great skill made him a standout among newer portraitists, and his fame quickly spread. He confidently set high prices and turned down unsatisfactory sitters. His most controversial work, Portrait of Madame X, Madame Pierre Gautreau, in 1884, is now considered one of his best works and was the artist's personal favorite. Because of her social standing, Sargent thought that it would greatly enhance his reputation if he could paint her portrait. The painting was not commissioned by her, and he pursued her for the opportunity, quite unlike most of his portrait work where the client sought him out. It took well over a year to complete the painting. The first version of the portrait of Madame Gautreau, with the famously plunging neckline, white powdered skin, and arrogantly cocked head, featured an intentionally suggestive off-the-shoulder dress strap on her right side only, which made the overall effect even more daring. When unveiled in Paris in 1884 at the Salon, it aroused such a scandalous reaction that it likely prompted Sargent's move to London. Sargent repainted the strap to its expected over-the-shoulder position to try to dampen the furor, but the damage had been done. French commissions dried up, and he told his friend Edmond Goss in 1885 that he contemplated giving up painting for music or business. He kept the painting in his studio for over 30 years, but finally sold it to the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art a few months after Madame Gautreau's death, with the stipulation that the sitter's name remain anonymous. Even though everyone knew who the woman in the painting was, she is now referred to as Madame X. Prior to the Madame X scandal of 1884, Sargent had painted exotic beauties such as Rosina Ferreira of Capri and the Spanish expatriate model Carmela Bartagna, but the earlier pictures had not been intended for broad public reception. Before arriving in England, Sargent began sending paintings for exhibition at the Royal Academy. These included the portraits of Dr. Potsy at home and the more traditional Mrs. Henry White. The ensuing portrait commissions encouraged Sargent to complete his move to London in 1886. Critics were not warm at first, faulting Sargent for his clever, Frenchified handling of paint. With the help from Mrs. White, however, Sargent soon gained the admiration of English patrons and critics. Sargent spent much of his time painting outdoors in the English countryside when not in his studio. On a visit to Monet at Giverny in 1885, Sargent painted one of his most impressionistic portraits of Monet at work painting outdoors with his new bride nearby. Sargent is usually not thought of as an impressionist painter, but he sometimes used impressionistic techniques to great effect. His Claude Monet painting at the edge of a wood is rendered in his own version of the impressionistic style. Sargent was similarly inspired to do a portrait of his artist friend Paul César Elieu, also painting outdoors with his wife by his side. Through Elieu, Sargent met and painted the famous French sculptor Auguste Rodin in 1884. Sargent's first major success at the Royal Academy came in 1887 with the enthusiastic response to Carmination Lily, Lily Rose, a large piece, painted on site, of two young girls lighting lanterns in the English garden. The painting was immediately purchased by the Tate Gallery. His first trip to New York and Boston as a professional artist in 1887 to 88 produced over 20 important commissions, including portraits of Isabella Stewart Gardner, the famed Boston art patron. His portrait of Mrs. Adrian Iceland, wife of New York businessman, revealed her character in one of the most insightful works. Back in London, Sargent was quickly busy again. His working methods were by then well established, following many of the steps employed by other master portrait painters before him. After securing a commission through negotiations which he carried out, Sargent would visit the client's home to see where the painting was to hang. He would then often review a client's wardrobe to pick suitable attire. Some portraits were done in the client's home, but more often in his studio, which was well stocked with furniture and background materials he chose for proper effect. He usually required 8 to 10 sittings from his clients, although he would try to capture the face in one sitting. He usually kept up a pleasant conversation, and sometimes he would take a break to play the piano for his sitter. Sargent seldom used paint or oil sketches, and instead laid down oil paint directly. Finally, he would select an appropriate frame. Sargent had no assistants. He handled all the tasks, such as preparing the canvases, varnishing the painting, arranging for photography, shipping, and documenting. He commanded about $5,000 per portrait, or about $130,000 in current dollars. Some American clients traveled to London at their own expense to have Sargent paint their portrait. In the 1890s, he averaged 14 portrait commissions per year, none more beautiful than the genteel Lady Agnew of Lucknow in 1892. His portrait of Mrs. Hugh Hammersley was equally well received for its lively depiction of one of London's most notable hostesses. Sargent painted portraits of Robert Louis Stevenson and his wife. He also completed portraits of the two presidents, Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. In 1907, at the age of 51, Sargent officially closed his studio. Relieved, he stated, "Painting a portrait would be quite amusing if one were not forced to talk while working. What a nuisance, having to entertain the sitter and to look happy when one feels wretched." In that same year, Sargent painted his modest and serious self-portrait, his last for the celebrated self-portrait collection of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy. During Sargent's long career, he painted more than 2,000 watercolors, roving from English countryside to Venice, to the Tyrol, to Corfu, to the Middle East, Montana, Maine, Florida. Each destination offered pictorial stimulation and treasure. Even in his leisure, in escaping the pressures of a portrait studio, he painted with restless intensity, often painting from morning until night. As a concession to the insatiable demand of wealthy patrons for portraits, Sargent dashed off hundreds of rapid charcoal portrait sketches, which he called mugs. 46 of these spanning from the years of 1890 to 1916. Upon his return to England in 1918 after a visit to the United States, Sargent was commissioned as a war artist by the British Ministry of Information. In his large painting Gast, and in many watercolors, he depicted scenes from World War I. Sargent had been affected by the death of his niece, Rose Marie, in the shelling of St. Gervais Church in Paris on Good Friday in 1918. Rose Marie, who had lost her husband to the war, became a nurse to serve soldiers blinded by mustard gas attacks. In 1922, Sargent co-founded the New York City's Grand Central Art Galleries together with Edmund Gratian, Walter Leighton Clark, and others. Sargent actively participated in the Grand Central Art Galleries and their academy, the Grand Central School of Art. The galleries held a major retrospective exhibition of Sargent's work in 1924. He then returned to England, where he died suddenly at his Chelsea home on April 14, 1925.